Pablo Escobar walked through the gates of La Catedral prison, carrying 2 duffel bags filled with $2 million in cash. What he built inside those walls in the next 13 months didn't just shock Colombia. It made the government realize they hadn't imprisoned the most dangerous drug lord in history. They'd given a kingdom. June 19, 1991, 9:47 a.m., Envigado, Colombia. A convoy of armored vehicles climbed the mountain road toward La Catedral prison. Inside the lead vehicle sat Pablo Escobar, 41 years old, 5'6", 200 pounds, the richest criminal in human history, worth an estimated $30 billion, more money than the GDP of half the countries on Earth. Pablo was turning himself in, surrendering to the Colombian government. After years of war, after thousands of deaths, after bombing a commercial airliner out of the sky, after declaring war on the entire nation, Pablo Escobar was going to prison. The Colombian people celebrated in the streets. The DEA agents in Bogotá opened champagne. The victims' families wept with relief. Finally, justice. Finally, the monster was caged. But Pablo wasn't going to just any prison. He was going to La Catedral, a prison he'd designed himself, a prison he'd paid to build, a prison located on land he owned, a prison guarded by men on his payroll, a prison with rules he'd negotiated personally with the Colombian government. This wasn't a surrender. This was a business transaction. And those 2 duffel bags he carried, that $2 million in cash, that was just the beginning. 3 months earlier, March 1991, Pablo Escobar sat in a safe house in Medellin. He was tired, not physically tired, mentally exhausted. For 2 years, he'd been running. The Colombian government wanted him dead. The Cali cartel wanted him dead. The paramilitary groups wanted him dead. Los Pepes, a death squad funded by his enemies, was hunting his family, bombing his properties, killing his associates. Pablo had won every battle, but he was losing the war, not because he lacked power, not because he lacked money, but because his family was suffering. His wife, Tata, lived in constant fear. His children couldn't go to school. His mother cried every night, certain she'd bury her son. Pablo's lawyer, Guido Parra, brought news. The government wanted to negotiate. President Cesar Gaviria was willing to make a deal. No extradition to the United States. That was Pablo's only real fear. Colombian prison he could handle. American Supermax prison would be his death. The DEA would make sure of it. But Pablo had conditions, very specific conditions. He would surrender, but only to a prison of his choosing, a prison he would build, on his land, with his guards, and the Colombian government, desperate to end the violence, desperate to show the world they'd captured Pablo Escobar, agreed. They agreed to everything. If you're already hooked by this story, hit that subscribe button right now, because what Pablo built inside La Catedral is going to blow your mind. I promise you've never heard the full story before. La Catedral wasn't a traditional prison. It was a compound built on a mountainside overlooking Medellin. 8 acres of land, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Those guard towers, manned by Pablo's men. The prison guards? On Pablo's payroll, $1,000 a month each. More money than they'd make in a year working for the government. The prison had a main building, 3 stories, thick concrete walls, reinforced steel doors. From the outside, it looked like a legitimate prison. Maximum security, impenetrable. Inside was different, very different. The construction had taken 6 months. Pablo hired architects, engineers, contractors who understood what he wanted. The blueprints showed a standard prison. What they built was something else entirely. Secret rooms, hidden passages, walls thicker than necessary. Not for security, for soundproofing. June 19, 1991. Pablo walked through the front gate. The government officials were there for the photo opportunity. Cameras flashing, journalists shouting questions. The Minister of Justice shaking hands with Pablo, smiling for the cameras like they'd just signed a peace treaty. In a way, they had. Pablo was escorted to his cell, but it wasn't a cell. It was a master bedroom, king-size bed, private bathroom, hot water, a window overlooking the city below, the city he'd built his empire in, the city he still controlled, even from behind bars. The government officials left, the journalists left, the cameras disappeared, and the moment they were gone, Pablo opened those 2 duffel bags, $2 million in cash, small bills, untraceable, and he began building. Pablo didn't waste time. The first thing he built was the communication system, satellite phones, encrypted radios, internet connection. In 1991, internet was rare, even in corporate offices. Pablo had it in prison. He could communicate with his cartel, could coordinate cocaine shipments, could order hits, could run his entire empire from a cell that wasn't actually a cell. The guards were instructed to look the other way. Not that they needed instructions. They were earning more money than they'd ever seen. Some of them had worked security for the government for 20 years and never made what Pablo paid them in a month. One guard, named Carlos, had 3 kids and a leaking roof. He'd been a prison guard for 15 years, made $300 a month, lived in a 2-room apartment where rain came through the ceiling every winter. When Pablo's people approached him with an offer, Carlos knew what it meant. Work for Pablo. Look the other way. Pretend you don't see things. $1,000 a month. Cash. Carlos went home that night, told his wife. She cried, not from fear, from relief. For the first time in their marriage, they could fix the roof, send their kids to a decent school, afford medicine when someone got sick. Carlos took the job. So did 40 other guards, men with families, men with debts, men who'd been loyal to the government for years, until the government proved it couldn't pay them what they were worth. Pablo didn't buy loyalty with fear, he bought it with money, and money was far more persuasive than fear. Pablo's brother Roberto visited frequently, so did his wife, Tata, his children, his mother, his cousins, his associates. La Catedral had visiting hours, but they were flexible, very flexible. Sometimes visitors stayed for days. Tata's first visit? She cried, because the bedroom was nicer than hotels they'd stayed in while running. The sheets were Egyptian cotton. The bathroom had imported Italian tile. There was a TV, a stereo, books. And Pablo's children, Juan Pablo and Manuela, ran through the compound like it was a playground, playing soccer with guards, swimming in a pool Pablo had installed, eating meals prepared by professional chefs. To them, this wasn't a prison. This was just another place where Daddy lived. When Manuela asked why Daddy couldn't come home, Pablo knelt down and said, "Sometimes men have to stay in one place to protect the people they love. This is Daddy's place right now, but you can visit any time." She asked if she could have her birthday party here. Pablo said yes. 2 months later, 50 children showed up at La Catedral for Manuela's 7th birthday. Balloons, cake, clowns, a magician. Presents stacked higher than the children. The guards served ice cream and soda. Parents watched their children play soccer on the same field where, months later, 2 men would be buried. The government knew about the party, did nothing, said nothing, pretended not to notice. Within 3 months, La Catedral stopped looking like a prison and started looking like a resort. Pablo built a soccer field, full size, regulation dimensions, grass shipped in from Brazil. He loved soccer. He would play for hours with his guards, his visitors, his fellow inmates. There were only a handful of other inmates, all of them members of Pablo's cartel, all of them living in similar cells with private bathrooms and comfortable beds. Pablo built a bar, fully stocked, Colombian rum, imported whiskey, wine from Chile, beer on tap. The bar had a pool table, a jukebox, leather bar stools. It looked like something out of a Bogota nightclub. Pablo would sit there at night, drinking with his men, planning operations, making phone calls, running his empire. Drop a comment right now, telling me if you can believe the Colombian government actually allowed this to happen. Because what comes next is even more insane. He built a jacuzzi, outdoor, overlooking the valley. Pablo would sit in that jacuzzi at sunset, smoking cigars, surrounded by armed guards who worked for him, not the government. He'd watch the lights of Medellin flicker on as darkness fell. His city, his empire, his kingdom. He built a disco. Yes, a disco, with a DJ booth, sound system, lights, fog machines. Pablo would throw parties on weekends. Women would be brought in, not visitors going through official channels. Women hired for the evening. They'd arrive in cars driven by guards, stay until morning, leave with cash in their purses. Saturday nights at La Catedral were legendary. The disco would start at 10 p.m. Music loud enough to be heard across the compound. Salsa, merengue, American pop. The lights would flash red, blue, green. The fog machine filled the room with artificial clouds. Pablo would sit at a table in the corner, drinking whiskey, surrounded by his men, watching dancers move to the rhythm. Visitors from Medellin would arrive, businessmen wanting deals, politicians seeking favors, people who needed Pablo's blessing. Pablo held court like a king, receiving subject every Saturday night, while the Colombian government slept, while DEA agents in Bogota filed reports. While the world thought Pablo Escobar was locked in a cell, he was dancing in a disco he'd built with $2 million in cash. The prison had a kitchen, industrial size. Pablo hired chefs, real chefs, from restaurants in Medellin. They'd prepare meals like Pablo was staying at a 5-star hotel. Steak, lobster, fresh fish, imported wine. Pablo ate better in prison than most Colombians ate in freedom. He built a gym, weight room, treadmills, punching bags. Pablo was getting fat. Prison food in a normal prison makes you fat, but Pablo wasn't in a normal prison. He had personal trainers, nutritionists, doctors who'd visit weekly to check his health. But the most audacious thing Pablo built? The thing that proved he wasn't just bending the rules, but completely rewriting them? He built escape tunnels, plural, multiple tunnels, leading from the prison to various points on the mountain. Just in case the government changed their mind, just in case the DEA got too close, just in case he needed to disappear. The Colombian government knew. They had to, but they did nothing. Why? Because Pablo's surrender had stopped the violence. The car bombings stopped. The assassinations stopped. The cocaine trafficking continued, but the violence stopped. And for the Colombian government, that was enough. August 1991, 2 months after Pablo's surrender, a team of Colombian military officers was dispatched to La Catedral for a routine inspection. Standard procedure. Make sure the prison was being run according to regulations. Make sure security protocols were being followed. The officers arrived at 6 a.m. Early morning inspections were designed to catch prisoners off guard, catch them doing things they shouldn't be doing. They found Pablo on the soccer field, playing a match with his guards, laughing, shouting, completely relaxed. He saw the military officers approaching, didn't stop playing, just waved, like they were expected guests. The lead officer, Colonel Martinez, walked the grounds, saw the bar, saw the disco, saw the jacuzzi, saw the kitchen, saw the gym. His face went pale. This wasn't a prison. This was a resort. This was a luxury compound, disguised as a detention facility. He demanded to speak to the warden. The warden was nervous, stammering, explaining that these amenities were approved, that Pablo's surrender agreement included certain accommodations, that the government knew about everything. But Colonel Martinez wasn't stupid. He started asking questions. Where was the armory? Where were the weapons stored? How many guards were on duty? What were the security protocols? The warden couldn't answer, wouldn't it? Because the truth was, there was no real security. The guards worked for Pablo. The weapons were wherever Pablo wanted them. The protocols were whatever Pablo decided. Colonel Martinez wrote a report, 15 pages, detailed, damning. He sent it up the chain of command, to the Ministry of Justice, to the President's office, to anyone who would listen. His message was clear. We didn't imprison Pablo Escobar. We gave him a fortress. The report was buried, filed away, ignored, because admitting the truth would mean admitting the government had been played, admitting they'd negotiated a deal that made a mockery of justice, admitting the most dangerous criminal was living better in prison than most Colombians lived in freedom. Subscribe right now if you want to see how this ends, because the moment Pablo made one critical mistake, everything came crashing down. November 1991, 5 months after Pablo's surrender. The cartel was running smoothly. Cocaine shipments to the United States were at an all-time high. Pablo was making an estimated $60 million a week. From prison, his family visited often. His mother would cook. His children would play on the soccer field. But Pablo got territorial. 2 of his associates, Fernando Galeano and Gerardo Moncada, were accused of stealing from the cartel, skimming money, holding back profits. In the drug world, that's a death sentence. Pablo invited them to La Catedral for a meeting to discuss the accusations. They came willingly, walked through the gates thinking they were safe, thinking nobody would be killed inside a government prison. They were wrong. The meeting started civilized, coffee served, cigarettes offered. Pablo asked about the missing $20 million gone, unaccounted for. Galeano and Moncada denied everything, said there was a mistake, said the accountants were wrong, said they would never steal from Pablo, never betray him. Pablo listened, nodded, smiled. Then he stood up, walked to the door, locked it. The smile disappeared. He called for his men. 4 guards entered, not government guards, Pablo's personal security, men who'd killed before. Galeano realized what was happening, started backing toward the window, begging, pleading, swearing he was loyal. Moncada tried to run. A guard grabbed him. They were dragged to a room in the basement, a room that didn't exist on any official blueprint, a room with concrete walls and soundproofing, drains in the floor. They were tortured for hours. The screams could be heard across the compound. The guards did nothing. They were paid not to hear, paid not to see. By the end, both men confessed, admitted they'd been skimming money, admitted they'd been planning to break away, admitted they'd been talking to the Cali cartel. Then they were killed, their bodies buried on the prison grounds. In the soccer field, under the grass Pablo had imported from Brazil, the same field where Manuela had celebrated her birthday. The ground soaked their blood. The grass grew greener. The government found out, not immediately, but news travels. Families asked questions. Associates started talking, and the truth leaked. Pablo Escobar had murdered 2 men inside a Colombian prison, inside a facility supposedly under government control. The scandal exploded. The newspapers ran stories. The international community demanded answers. The DEA pressured the Colombian government. President Gaviria had no choice. He had to act. July 22, 1992, 1:47 a.m. A convoy of military vehicles approached La Catedral. This wasn't an inspection. This was a raid. The government was transferring Pablo to a real prison, a maximum security facility, with real guards, real walls, real security. But Pablo had informants everywhere, including inside the president's office. He knew they were coming, had known for hours, was already prepared. When the military arrived, they found the prison empty. Not just Pablo, all the inmates, all the guards who were on Pablo's payroll, everyone, gone, vanished. They'd used the escape tunnels, the tunnels Pablo had built 13 months earlier, the tunnels the government inspectors had found but ignored. Colonel Martinez found the main tunnel entrance in Pablo's bedroom, behind a fake wall, 3 feet wide, 4 feet tall. The tunnel stretched 300 meters through solid rock, reinforced with steel beams, lit with electric lights. At the end was a ladder, leading to a camouflaged exit in the forest. Professional, military grade, the kind of tunnel that requires engineers and months to build. Every inspector who found it was paid to forget. Pablo Escobar walked out of La Catedral the same way he walked in, on his own terms. But this time, he didn't take duffel bags full of cash. He took something more valuable. He took the knowledge that the Colombian government was weak, that they could be manipulated, that they could be bought. For 13 months, Pablo had lived in luxury, while technically imprisoned. He'd run his cartel, made billions, lived better than free men. And when the government finally tried to assert control, he simply left. The manhunt that followed lasted 16 months. 16 months of running, hiding, moving from safe house to safe house while a joint task force of Colombian police and DEA agents closed in. Pablo lost weight, stopped sleeping, lost contact with his family. His wife and children fled to different countries, seeking asylum. Nobody would take them. The Cali cartel put a $10 million bounty on his head. Los Pepes, a death squad funded by his enemies, killed his associates one by one, bombed his properties, burned his houses. The government seized everything, froze his accounts. On December 2, 1993, they found him in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin, in a safe house with bad security. Pablo tried to run, climbed onto the roof. A sniper put 2 bullets in him. He fell face down, blood pooling on red tiles. The most powerful criminal in history, dead on a rooftop. His death was celebrated around the world. But La Catedral remained. The prison stood empty for years, a monument to corruption. Eventually, it was demolished. The land returned to forest. But the story lived on. The disco was destroyed. The bar removed. The jacuzzi was filled with concrete. The soccer field was dug up. They found the bodies, Galeano and Moncada, right where Pablo had buried them. Hit that like button and subscribe right now, because this story proves something important that applies way beyond Colombia and drug cartels. La Catedral wasn't just a prison. It was proof that money doesn't just corrupt. It transforms. It turns prisons into palaces, guards into servants, justice into theater. Pablo Escobar understood something fundamental about power. Real power isn't controlling people through fear. It's controlling people through incentives. The guards at La Catedral didn't work for Pablo because he threatened them. They worked for Pablo because he paid them. The government officials didn't ignore the violations because Pablo intimidated. They ignored violations because stopping them would mean admitting they'd been played. That $2 million Pablo walked into prison with? It bought 13 months of freedom, disguised as imprisonment. It bought a kingdom, disguised as a cage. It bought time to run his empire while the world believed he was locked away. The money kept everything running smoothly. $1,000 per guard per month. 40 guards. That's $40,000 a month, just for security. Then the chefs, the cleaners, the maintenance workers, the construction crews who built the disco and the bar and the jacuzzi, the inspectors who filed false reports, the architects who looked the other way, the politicians who accepted donations to stay quiet. Every person had a price. Every person took the money. $2 million lasted exactly 13 months. When it ran out, Pablo had made $3 billion from inside those walls, a 1,500% return on investment, the greatest business deal in criminal history. Then Pablo escaped, left the prison empty, left the government humiliated, left the world wondering how this had happened. The answer was simple: money. Just money. $2 million in cash, and the understanding that every person, every system, every government has a breaking point, and that breaking point is usually much lower than you think. The Colombian government surrendered to Pablo Escobar long before they raided La Catedral. They surrendered the moment they agreed to his terms, the moment they let him choose his prison, the moment they accepted his guards, the moment they believed they could control a man who'd spent his entire life refusing to be controlled. Some people asked why Pablo surrendered at all, if he was just going to escape later. The answer is simple. For 13 months, he was legally untouchable. The DEA couldn't raid La Catedral. Rival cartels couldn't attack him. The government couldn't extradite him. He had protection, legitimacy, and he used that time to restructure his cartel, secure his assets, and plan his next move. When Pablo finally escaped, he did so on his own terms, not because he was forced out, not because walls couldn't hold him, because he'd gotten everything he needed from his time inside. The ultimate con, the greatest manipulation in criminal history, a man who turned surrender into strategy, imprisonment into empire. Rest in peace to the guards at La Catedral, who thought they were working for the government, but were really working for Pablo. Rest in peace to the government officials who thought they'd caged a monster, but really gave him a throne. Rest in peace to Pablo Escobar, 1949–1993. The man who proved that sometimes the difference between a prison and a palace is just who's signing the checks. Leave a comment telling me, if you were offered $1,000 a month to guard a prisoner you knew was running a criminal empire, would you take it? Because that's the question every guard at La Catedral had to answer, and we know what they chose. The end.